Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. Israel deepens its military push inside Lebanon as fighting with Hezbollah enters a more dangerous phase. Ukraine urges Europe to take a bigger role in peace efforts as US-led diplomacy struggles to gain momentum. And Washington and Yerevan deepen strategic ties with new agreements on critical minerals and regional transit. Israel is deepening its military push inside Lebanon as the fighting with Hezbollah enters a more dangerous phase. The latest escalation is raising fresh concerns over how far this conflict could spread.
Israel has expanded its ground operations in southern Lebanon amid escalating clashes with Hezbollah, according to officials and local reports. Dozens of people have been killed in an intensive wave of Israeli strikes across southern and eastern Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said operations are being deepened, with forces pushing further into southern areas of Lebanon and targeting what he described as Hezbollah positions. He said the goal is to strengthen security for communities in northern Israel. The Israeli military said it struck more than 100 Hezbollah-linked sites across southern Lebanon and the eastern Bekaa Valley, including command centers, storage facilities and observation points. Lebanese authorities say an Israeli strike on the village of Mashgara killed 12 people, including members of the same family. Rescue teams have been searching through rubble for survivors. Hezbollah said it responded with rocket and drone attacks, targeting Israeli troops and vehicles near border areas. Reports indicate Israeli forces have advanced beyond a previously established demarcation line inside southern Lebanon, though the extent of the movement has not been independently confirmed. The escalation comes as ceasefire efforts continue, but have been repeatedly undermined by ongoing cross-border exchanges of fire.
The fragile ceasefire between Iran and the United States is facing renewed pressure after fresh American strikes near the Strait of Hormuz. Washington says the operation was defensive. Tehran is calling it a violation of the truce.
Iran has accused the United States of committing what it called a gross violation of the truce with the new strikes it launched on the country. The strikes were confirmed by US Central Command, which said American forces targeted Iranian missile sites and boats allegedly preparing to place mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The US described the operation as a self-defense strike aimed at protecting its troops and securing the vital shipping route. Iran's foreign ministry strongly condemned the attacks, calling them aggressive and unjustified. Tehran warned that it would respond to what it described as hostile actions and said the United States would be responsible for the consequences. The strikes reportedly took place near Bandar Abbas, home to a major Iranian naval base along the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil transit routes. Iran's blockade of the waterway has already pushed global energy prices higher. Iranian state media said explosions were heard in the area, while the Revolutionary Guard later claimed it had shot down a US drone and fired at an American fighter jet that entered Iranian airspace. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issued a strong warning in a message carried by Iranian media during the Day of Arafah, part of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Khamenei said Middle Eastern nations and territories would no longer serve as shields for US military bases. He added that the hands of time will not turn back, signaling what he described as a new regional order taking shape. The developments come during ongoing negotiations aimed at extending the ceasefire reached on April 8th after weeks of deadly conflict. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says a deal is still possible within days. But President Donald Trump has signaled caution, telling negotiators not to rush the talks.
Israeli airstrikes on Tuesday hit a residential block in southern Ramal, west of Gaza City, killing 3 Palestinians and injuring 20 others. The strike also hit a residential block, leaving heavy damage across the surrounding area, according to eyewitnesses and a local source. Separately, the Israeli Prime Minister's office said the army had targeted Mohammed Odeh, described as a commander in Hamas' armed wing, just days after his predecessor was killed in a similar operation. Frustration over conditions at US Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention centres once again focused on a facility in New Jersey on Tuesday as demonstrators gathered outside the privately operated site a day after protests there descended into chaos. Protesters calling for the privately run detention centre to be shut down blocked unmarked government vehicles and confronted armed masked ICE agents, some of whom deployed gas canisters and batons. Demonstrators alleged human rights abuses at the site and demanded the release of detainees held there. Ukraine is pushing Europe to take a bigger role in peace efforts as US-led diplomacy struggles to gain momentum. The appeal comes amid renewed Russian strikes and growing concerns in European capitals over the direction of the war.
Ukraine is calling on the European Union to take a more active role in ending the war with Russia ahead of an informal meeting of EU foreign ministers in Cyprus. Kyiv is seeking what it calls new dynamics in the negotiation process, with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha pushing for a new format of talks involving greater European participation as US-led mediation efforts stall and Russia escalates its military campaign. The EU is reportedly considering renewed engagement with Moscow, even as Russian forces continue heavy strikes across Ukraine, which Kyiv and its allies say have killed civilians and damaged critical infrastructure. Earlier, Russian officials, meanwhile, have warned of further systematic strikes on Kyiv, urging foreign diplomats and citizens to leave the capital. The Kremlin says the attacks are in response to Ukrainian drone operations, while Ukraine rejects responsibility and calls the threats blackmail. At the United Nations, Ukraine's envoy Andriy Melnik accused Russia of intensifying attacks on civilians and infrastructure and called for a full ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian forces.
On the night of May 23 to May 24, Russian armed forces launched one of the largest combined attacks against Ukraine, employing hundreds of aerial weapons, including ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles. For the city of Kyiv, this was one of the most devastating attacks recorded to date.
The escalation has drawn international concern. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council he is deeply concerned by Russia's plan for expanded strikes in Ukraine, warning that further escalation could prolong civilian suffering and delay peace. European countries, including Germany, the Netherlands and Norway, have summoned Russian envoys in protest, while EU officials have condemned Moscow's warnings to diplomats as an unacceptable escalation and urged an immediate ceasefire. Russia has defended its actions, saying it is targeting military-linked facilities and rejecting Western criticism, while insisting its campaign will continue.
Ukrainian drones entering Baltic airspace in recent weeks have increased tensions in the region. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia confirmed the drones were Ukrainian but blamed Russia's electronic warfare systems for forcing them off course. NATO said it shot down a suspected drone over Estonia on the 19th of May. In Lithuania, lawmakers were forced to take shelter as a drone approached the capital, Vilnius. The Baltic states accuse Moscow of using threatening rhetoric, while Russia claims Ukraine is using Baltic airspace to carry out attacks. Analysts warn that growing tensions and possible miscalculations could lead to unintended escalation in the region. Norway is stepping up support for Ukraine with a new €40 million package aimed at helping the country protect its energy system before winter. The funding will be channeled through the European Union's Ukraine investment framework, focusing on repairs to damaged infrastructure, renewable energy projects, battery storage and decentralised power networks. Norwegian officials say the aim is to help Ukraine withstand further disruption as Russian missile and drone attacks continue to target critical facilities. The package is also expected to support Kyiv's longer-term alignment with European energy standards as the country works to build greater resilience while the war continues. The United Kingdom has imposed new sanctions targeting Russia-linked cryptocurrency platforms, banks and financial networks accused of helping to bypass existing restrictions. Officials say the measures cover 18 individuals and entities with assets frozen and UK firms banned from processing payments or maintaining financial ties with the designated networks. London says the action is aimed at disrupting what it calls, quote, shadow financial systems linked to Russia's war economy, including firms operating across multiple jurisdictions. A new survey suggests European companies are still maintaining or expanding their production networks in mainland China, despite ongoing efforts to reduce exposure, with most firms reporting either growth or stability in their supply chain strategies.
Nearly 7 in 10 European companies operating in mainland China say they are either staying put or expanding their supply chains, according to a new EU Chamber of Commerce survey of almost 300 members. Around 1/3 of respondents said they were increasing their presence in China, while 37% reported no change in strategy over the past 2 years. Overall, 68% are either maintaining or expanding operations, compared with just 7% who said they are moving sourcing or production outside the country. Jens Eskelund, president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, said companies do not see supply chain reduction in China becoming a dominant trend, adding that firms remain increasingly dependent on the country as a sourcing and manufacturing base. Logistics executive Michael Aldwell told CNBC's Squawk Box Asia that more supply chain activity is now being managed from within China as local systems mature.
Rising amount of business in our industry that's controlled, decided, shipped, and paid for here in China. And we see that in the big emerging industries of China, so in automotive, in battery production, in technology, in consumer electronics goods.
Aldwell added that this reflects a broader shift as Chinese firms take greater control of international supply chains where delivery is increasingly managed end-to-end from China to global markets. Cost and efficiency appear to be key drivers behind the trend. Chinese factories have rapidly increased automation, reducing reliance on labor and allowing faster production. Chinese EV maker NIO was cited as an example, with one of its factories operating 941 robots capable of running continuously without workers on the production floor. Around 3/4 of EU firms surveyed said their operations in China were more efficient than elsewhere, with lower energy and raw material costs also contributing to China's manufacturing advantage. Overall, the findings suggest European firms continue to balance diversification efforts with a sustained reliance on China's scale, speed, and industrial ecosystem.
The World Health Organization is stepping up its response in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with its chief visiting affected areas as health teams warn that violence and poor access are hampering operations. The UN says the WHO chief is travelling to the Democratic Republic of Congo as the Ebola outbreak worsens, with more than 900 suspected cases and 220 suspected deaths reported. Health teams are providing essential services, but violence and poor access continue to slow the process. Millions of Muslims from around the world have gathered in Saudi Arabia for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Worshippers performed prayers at Mount Arafat before continuing sacred rituals in Mecca, including circling the Kaaba. The pilgrimage comes at a time of heightened tensions in the Middle East.
More than 1.5 million Muslims have gathered in Mecca for the annual Hajj pilgrimage, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. In the Saudi Arabia city, pilgrims performed the tawaf, walking 7 times around the Kaaba at the Grand Mosque, as part of the sacred rituals that symbolize faith, unity, and devotion. Other rites include the symbolic stoning of the devil. Earlier, millions gathered at Mount Arafat, around 20 kilometers from Mecca, for the most important stage of the pilgrimage. Pilgrims spent hours praying, reflecting and reciting verses from the Quran during the day of Arafah, considered the spiritual peak of Hajj. The pilgrimage brings together Muslims from across the world in a shared act of worship and humility. This year's Hajj also comes amid regional tensions, following US and Israeli attacks on Iran earlier this year.
And millions of people across the globe are celebrating Eid al-Adha, one of the most important occasions in the Islamic calendar. The festival is being observed in different countries and bringing together communities.
Millions of Muslims across the globe are celebrating Eid al-Adha on Wednesday, one of the most sacred festivals in Islam, marked by prayers, charity, family gatherings and reflection. This year, Eid al-Adha is being observed on May 27th in many countries, while some nations are celebrating on May 28th, depending on moon sightings and decisions by local Islamic authorities. Countries across the Middle East, Asia, Europe, Africa and North America have joined in the celebrations. In Istanbul, large crowds gathered at mosques across the city for Eid prayers on the first day of the holiday. Worshippers began arriving early in the morning, filling mosques and prayer grounds, as both local residents and foreign visitors took part in the celebrations. Muslims across Azerbaijan, including in the capital Baku, also performed Eid prayers at mosques nationwide, with communities coming together in a spirit of unity and devotion. In Karachi city of Pakistan, large numbers of worshippers gathered to mark the occasion with special Eid prayers, as families and communities celebrated together across the country. Muslims across Indonesia gathered at mosques to observe Eid al-Adha with communal prayers and celebrations, while many also expressed concern over rising prices and ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
My hope for us as the Indonesian nation, our hope is that we will all be peaceful, because it has a huge influence and a big impact on our economic situation.
Despite the ongoing tensions, Palestinians in Gaza City attended Eid al-Adha prayers on Wednesday, gathering at mosques across the city in observance of the holiday. For many communities, this year's Eid carries a message of resilience and hope during challenging times. Across different regions, prayers have been offered for peace, stability, and a brighter future for humanity.
After the break, we'll take a look at the latest diplomatic moves involving Iran as military tensions continue to grow across the Middle East. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. An Iranian delegation has returned to Tehran after what officials described as generally positive talks in Qatar, amid continuing diplomatic efforts surrounding the escalating crisis involving the US, Iran and Israel. At the same time, US President Donald Trump is convening his cabinet at Camp David to discuss the situation in Iran, while the Israeli military has expanded ground operations in southern Lebanon beyond the Blue Line and says it has struck more than 100 Hezbollah targets. The developments underline how diplomacy, military escalation and regional power calculations are now unfolding simultaneously across multiple fronts in the Middle East. To discuss further, let's bring in our guest. Daniela Mello, political scientist, joins us from Lisbon, Portugal. Daniela, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Iranian officials described the Qatar talks as generally positive, yet military tensions across the region continue to intensify. Diplomacy and escalation continue to unfold in parallel, and this has been going on for some time. What's your analysis here?
Well, in fact, this has been going on for some time, and we're watching a pattern that we have seen in the past as well, in which, as the United States, through President Trump, announces being close to reaching a deal with the Iranians, we then see what seems to be foot dragging or backtracking or different messages coming from different angles. Having said that, there seems to be a different momentum at this moment from previous announcements of being close to negotiations or to an agreement on how to proceed with the negotiations. The United States has held steadily, unlike in the past, on the idea of maintaining the negotiations alive. And I say this because this is important. It's important to understand that it's not just Mr. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State in the United States, saying that we want to give diplomacy a go. It's that President Trump is signaling that his preference is undoubtedly a negotiation out of the situation with Iran rather than an escalation. We have several examples of this that have been made public. Perhaps the most important amongst them, the phone call that the president had last week with the president of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, in which it became public that Mr. Netanyahu was pressuring the president to re-engage the attacks in Iran, and the president has clearly chosen the diplomatic path. This comes, of course, in a context of increasing pressure on the American president at home, not just to find a solution, but to find a negotiated solution, and a negotiated solution that would prove a bigger win for the United States than what the JCPOA, which was the Iran treaty deal agreement, from 2015 under the Obama administration had achieved. So this pressure is coming not just from the Democrats, it's coming from the Republican Party itself. The president's not up for elections anymore. In fact, we may consider him a lame duck president at this moment. And he seems to be somewhat disconnected from let's say, from the electoral politics of his own party that is facing very difficult odds in the election coming up in November. However, his party is very well attuned to the fact that they are up for election, and they are pressuring, both in the Senate and in Congress, also pressuring the president to find a solution to this conflict as quickly as possible. So I think we are seeing we're seeing the president opting for a negotiated path, and we are seeing some reactions from the Iranians towards this. And this meeting in Qatar, and the fact that that the negotiations are still happening, that there hasn't been a severe escalation in spite of the few missiles that were fired yesterday. There has not been a severe escalation of the conflict, to me, strongly indicates that there's little trust between the two parties, and who can blame Iran for not trusting the United States and vice versa. But both seem completely engaged in trying to find a negotiation midterm, let's put it like that, middle path towards negotiation that they can both win, and they will both have to abdicate of some of their claims. The one claim that President Trump will definitely not abdicate on is the nuclear enrichment situation, and that's more because of domestic pressure than anything else.
Okay, and Daniela, let's move on to the other front. Israel has expanded operations beyond the Blue Line and says it struck more than 100 Hezbollah targets. How dangerous is the Lebanon front becoming within the broader regional crisis?
Well, it's never been a true ceasefire. As we know, it was a ceasefire imposed primarily by the United States on Israel as it negotiated a path out of this quagmire with Iran. It's obviously a destabilizing factor for the negotiations and for peace in the region at large, that Israel has decided to cross the line and to continue these attacks. However, I would say there seems to be also a pattern here. And the pattern seems to be that every time that the United States announces that it's close to coming to some form of agreement with Iran, we see an escalation on the part of the Israelis against Hezbollah. There's a few possible explanations for that. I think the most plausible is that it seems that one of the issues on the table is the cessation of all hostilities by the warring parties, and Israel is one of the warring parties. So if a negotiation agreement is announced between the United States and Iran that includes cessation of all hostilities, that really shortens the window for Israel to be able to strike against Hezbollah as it wishes. So we seem to be seeing this pattern in which every single time that an announcement of a potential agreement comes into play, we see Israel intensifying its strikes against Hezbollah. And that itself may be a positive sign for the proximity to the deal, or in these negotiations between the United States and Iran.
So to what extent then, Daniela, does Tehran realistically control or influence Hezbollah's calculations at this stage?
It's unclear. They continue, Hezbollah continues to project itself as being an ally of Iran, but Hezbollah also has its own independent strategic goals. And it's not very clear how much coordination there is with Iran at this particular juncture, though I think it's safe to assume that there is some level of coordination. From the outside, it's hard to look inside when we know so little about how the power structure is actually operating within Iran at this moment, and how the Revolutionary Guards are operationalizing their allies in the region. But we know that both with the Houthis and with Hezbollah, that there continues to be communication and some coordination. And if not, the threat that there could be also hovers over the region, because the Houthis could also close the strait in their region, and that could give extra leverage to Iran in negotiations in the future. This is something that obviously the United States is keeping also a close eye on. But Israel also has its own strategic goals in the region, and clearly controlling part of the territory that is in Lebanon, right north of Israel, and being able to harm the structure of Hezbollah and to distance it from Lebanese politics as much as possible is a key strategic security issue for Israel, that Israel is clearly not willing to abdicate of, even under the pressure of the United States, for them to keep it relatively, I'm really stressing this, relatively calm during this period. Because, as I said earlier, we are really not seeing a ceasefire here.
Daniela, that's all we have time for this hour. Thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate your analysis today.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Azerbaijan says the UN system must be more effective, more inclusive, and more firmly anchored in international law. Speaking in New York, Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov said justice, regional cooperation, and reform should remain central to global peace efforts.
Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov addressed a UN Security Council open debate on maintaining international peace and security. Held in New York under the presidency of China, the UN Security Council debate focused strengthening the UN-centered international system. In his speech, Bayramov stressed the necessity of ending impunity for violations of international law and ensuring justice. The minister stated that Azerbaijan is among the countries that have experienced the grave consequences of violations of the UN Charter and shortcomings in the implementation of international law.
Mr. President, Azerbaijan has itself experienced the devastating consequences of violations of the UN Charter and the failure in enforcing international law. Today, having emerged as a leading contributor to regional stability and reinforcing its peace agenda through tangible actions, Azerbaijan continues to advocate for a revitalized and reformed multilateral system with the United Nations at its core. Such a system also requires better utilization of regional organizations and formats that share the objective of the UN and contribute to their attainment.
The speech also highlighted the importance of reforms aimed at making the UN system more effective, inclusive and responsive. The minister emphasized the importance of regional organizations and cooperation formats operating in accordance with the goals and principles of the UN.
Azerbaijan has significantly contributed to multilateralism over the past years. This includes our result-oriented chairmanship in the non-aligned movement, our exemplary presidency and hosting of COP29 and the World Urban Forum, and our ongoing chairmanship of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia. To conclude, I recall that the Charter of the United Nations is built on the premise that through unity and cooperation, nations can establish a durable framework for peace, justice, and the rule of law.
During the visit, Minister Bayramov also met with the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in New York. The parties exchanged views on regional peace and security, sustainable development, climate action, and ongoing efforts to strengthen the effectiveness of the UN-centered international system.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev have held a phone call ahead of Eid al-Adha, pledging to strengthen ties and regional cooperation. Our correspondent Turar Shireliu has more.
The President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, and the Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev held a phone call on Tuesday on the advent of Eid al-Adha, during which they vowed to develop the mutual cooperation between their neighboring countries for expansion of regional prosperity and security. According to the Iranian President's office, the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to constructive cooperation aimed at achieving regional stability, prosperity, and sustainable development. President Pezeshkian expressed his gratitude for Azerbaijan's constructive stance and support during the Israel-US war with Iran, stressing that regional interactions are key to securing long-term peace and security. He also congratulated President Aliyev on the occasion of Azerbaijan's Independence Day on 28th of May. The office of Iranian president added that Azerbaijan's president wished peace and prosperity for the Iranian nation and voiced his country's strong support for an end to regional conflicts. The two presidents further exchanged views on bilateral cooperation in macroeconomic sectors, transit, and people-to-people exchanges. They stressed the necessity of accelerating the implementation of existing agreements to elevate the level of mutual relations. President Pezeshkian also held phone calls with presidents of Egypt, Iraq, Kyrgyzstan, Malaysia, Tajikistan, and Turkey, Emir of Qatar, Sultan of Oman, and Prime Minister of Iraq on the occasion of Eid al-Adha, discussing with them the expansion of bilateral ties and the latest regional developments. Turar Shireliu from Tehran for A News.
Afghanistan's economy is showing signs of growth, but the World Bank says this is not improving people's lives. Its new Afghanistan Development Update warns that falling aid, regional tensions, and the return of millions of Afghans are putting more pressure on the country. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Here in Kabul, the World Bank says Afghanistan's economy is experiencing moderate growth and macroeconomic stability has been relatively maintained. But the report stresses that this growth is not translating into better living standards for ordinary Afghans. According to the report, one of the main challenges is rapid population growth, driven largely by the return of millions of Afghans from neighboring countries. This has increased pressure on jobs, housing, food, and basic services. As a result, income per person is falling, meaning many families are becoming worse off despite overall economic growth. The report also warns that Afghanistan's future outlook remains fragile. Declining international aid, increasing external pressure, regional tensions, and weak trade are making the country more vulnerable. The World Bank says the economy may continue to grow, but without more jobs, higher incomes, and stronger support for basic services, many Afghans are unlikely to feel any real improvement in their daily lives. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Turkey is intensifying diplomatic contacts over rising regional tensions, with President Erdogan holding talks with the leaders of Iran and Pakistan amid renewed focus on US-Iran negotiations and Middle East stability. Here are the details.
Turkey is maintaining a high level of diplomatic engagement as regional tensions continue to simmer around Iran and the broader Middle East. According to the Turkish Communications Directorate, President Erdogan held separate phone calls on Tuesday with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. During his call with Pezeshkian, Erdogan reportedly said Ankara would continue supporting indirect talks between Iran and the United States, with the aim of achieving what he described as positive results. He also said that the ongoing regional conflict had cast a shadow over the Muslim Eid al-Adha holiday, which began on Tuesday, while also voicing hope that the Iranian people would overcome the difficult circumstances currently facing the country. In his phone call with Pakistan's Prime Minister, Erdogan stressed the importance of close Turkey-Pakistan relations, highlighting the mediating roles played by both countries. Tuesday's phone calls were part of a broader diplomatic push by Ankara in recent days. Over the weekend, Erdogan spoke with several regional leaders, as well as U.S. President Donald Trump, amid renewed speculation over a possible diplomatic breakthrough with Tehran. Those discussions came alongside increasing diplomatic activity surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points, through which roughly a fifth of globally traded oil passes. There have also been mounting concerns in recent days about a possible resumption of U.S.-Iran hostilities, which would likely have major implications for regional stability, global energy markets, and international shipping routes. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan have signed a strategic partnership agreement in Yerevan, deepening cooperation on critical minerals and regional transit. Let's take a look at that in this report.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan signed a strategic partnership agreement in the Armenian capital Yerevan on Tuesday. The meeting was held at Yerevan's Zvartnots International Airport during a brief stopover by Rubio. The two sides also signed a framework agreement on critical minerals, as well as another on cooperation over a proposed 43-kilometre transit corridor across southern Armenia. The route would provide Azerbaijan with direct access to its exclave of Nakhchivan and onward to Turkey.
Today, by renewing the Strategic Partnership Charter, it's an opportunity to outline the future of the U.S.-Armenia bilateral relationship and creating a new path for partnership and economic opportunity for Armenians and for Americans. Finally, we also, on the Memorandum of Understanding on critical minerals, is also going to further enhance mutual prosperity. Countries that are able to do that are going to be able to find economic independence and are going to be able to find themselves at the center of innovation in the 21st century.
Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan said the meeting created new opportunities for both sides, particularly in the fields of artificial intelligence and other strategic sectors. Rubio's visit comes as Russia has threatened to exert economic pressure on Yerevan over its growing ties with the West, including by raising the price Armenia pays for Russian gas if it moves away from integration with Moscow. Ahead of Rubio's brief visit, The Kremlin said on Monday Armenia could lose the very attractive price it currently pays for Russian gas if it distances itself from Russia. Armenia remains heavily dependent on Russia and Iran for energy supplies and would be hard hit by any increase in gas prices. Russia also banned imports of Armenian flowers, mineral water and brandy in another signal of its displeasure over Yerevan's warming ties with the West. Rubio's visit to Yerevan came less than 2 weeks before Armenia's parliamentary elections. On June 7th, Armenians will vote in an election pitting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party against a range of opposition groups, many of them considered pro-Russian.
Britain has sanctioned 3 Georgia-registered companies accused of helping Russia bypass restrictions after investigators link them to crypto payments and shadow financial networks. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has the details.
The United Kingdom says 3 companies registered in Georgia helped Russia evade sanctions. These companies are Arvix, Rapira Group and Avery. According to British authorities and blockchain investigators, these firms were involved in Russia's shadow financial system. One of them, Rapira, was registered in Georgia in November 2022, just months after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Investigators say it handled millions of dollars in crypto transactions linked to sanctioned Russian networks. Another company, Avery, reportedly helped convert cash into cryptocurrency through operations in Moscow, Dubai and Turkey. It was also involved in payments linked to Russia-China trade outside the regular banking system. Georgia's National Bank says none of the companies were under its supervision, but it also confirmed that in September 2025 it identified the firms operating without registration and passed information to law enforcement. That was 8 months ago. Now, questions are growing in Georgia. What action was taken after the warning? Who received the information? And why did it take UK sanctions for the case to become public? The UK has sanctioned more than 3,300 people, companies and vessels linked to Russia. 3 of those companies were registered in Georgia. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Uzbekistan is sending its first cargo shipment to Syria as both sides look to build new trade links through Aleppo. Our correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Uzbek companies have agreed to send the first shipment of goods to Syria using 10 cargo trucks. The agreement was reached during online negotiations organized by Chamber of Commerce and Industry with the participation of Uzbek and Syrian business representatives. According to the deal, 4 trucks will transport household appliances and other 4 will carry cooking oil products, while 2 trucks will deliver spare car parts and motor oils. The discussion also focused on logistics routes, demand for Uzbek products and the development of trade operations through the newly opened Uzbek-Syrian Trade House in Aleppo. Last week, Uzbekistan officially launched its first trade house and distribution center in the Syrian city of Aleppo, under the Made in Uzbekistan brand. Officials estimate delivery time to Syria at around 10 days, with transportation cost averaging $2,500 per container. Earlier, Chamber of Commerce Chairman Davon Vahabov said Uzbek exports to Syria could reach between $100 and $150 million in 2026, mainly through supplies of automobiles, electrical equipment and food products. It is Civil Rajab reported from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is to arrive in Kazakhstan today for a 3-day state visit centered on energy, trade and regional security talks with President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The visit coincides with the EU summit in Astana, where leaders are set to discuss economic integration, transport routes and regional cooperation. A key expected outcome is a nuclear energy deal, with Russia reportedly financing most of Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant since the Soviet era. Energy transit is also on the agenda, including Russian oil flows to China via Kazakhstan. Politically, the trip underlines Astana's balancing act between Moscow and Beijing, the West and regional partners. And after the break, we'll take a look at Putin's visit to Kazakhstan and what it means for Russia's regional influence. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We'll now shift our focus to the regional story for discussion. Russian President Vladimir Putin is about to arrive in Kazakhstan for a summit of the Eurasian Economic Union, the Russia-led regional bloc that includes Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. Just a correction there, the President has arrived in Kazakhstan. And now let's bring in our guest, a political analyst in Belgrade, Serbia, Nikola Mikovic. Nikola, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Dilek.
So Vladimir Putin's participation highlights the importance Moscow places on this Eurasian Economic Union. How strategically important is the union to Russia today?
Russia has been using the Eurasian Economic Union as an instrument that allows the Kremlin to preserve at least remnants of its influence in the post-Soviet space, particularly in Central Asia. The problem for Russia is that it continues losing its influence in the region, which is a direct result of Putin's Ukraine adventure. Now, this summit, in my view, is yet another attempt for Putin to preserve at least, as I said, some remnants of Russian influence in Kazakhstan as well as in other countries. Although I think the key topic that they will discuss will be energy. Nuclear energy, as one of your reporters mentioned earlier. Russia is interested in building a nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan, and they already reached an agreement on that. However, the construction has not started yet, so I think Russia is pressuring Kazakhstan to speed up the process and to begin to allow Russia's nuclear corporation, Rosatom, to start building facilities. So that's one of the topics they are expected to discuss. There will be, however, other issues, but I think the major problem for the organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, is that it is not expanding, unlike other organizations similar to this one, the European Union, most of all, which seeks to attract new members. The Eurasian Economic Union is not doing absolutely anything when it comes to getting new members, although Iran, for instance, repeatedly expressed its interest in joining the organization, but that does not seem to be on the horizon because the Kremlin is preventing Tehran from joining the bloc for geopolitical reasons. And now the organization, in my view, does not have as strong importance as it had in the past, especially given Russia's poor performances in Ukraine. And now the only thing that Putin can do at this point is to try to create an illusion at home that Russia still has some friends in the post-Soviet space. So that's how I see this summit in Astana, as Putin's attempt to create an illusion in Russia among his audience and his voters ahead of the upcoming parliamentary elections in Russia.
Okay. So as you put it, the Eurasian Economic Union is a way of preserving some remnants, as you put it, of influence in Kazakhstan since the Soviet era. But with Russia continuing to face Western sanctions and economic pressure, is the EEU becoming more important as an alternative economic framework for Moscow?
Yes, but there is no guarantee that Russia will be in a position to use that framework, because Western countries are pressuring Central Asian states not to allow Moscow to use their territories to bypass the sanctions. So it will be increasingly difficult for Russia to achieve that goal. What I would like to emphasize is that some countries are seeking to eventually leave the organization, Armenia first of all, and in the past few weeks or so, Russian top officials threatened Yerevan that it cannot seek to to remain in the Eurasian Economic Union while simultaneously develop closer ties with the European Union and aiming to join the EU. So I think if Pashinyan wins his party, if his party wins the election in Armenia on June 7th and he manages to form a new government, I think in the coming months or years, it is entirely possible that Armenia will leave the organization, especially if it's forced to choose between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, because it's quite clear that Russia is no longer in a position to provide security to its nominal ally, and other countries are not satisfied with the current format of the Eurasian Economic Union either, namely Kyrgyzstan. It also had disputes with Moscow recently about their bilateral ties, especially when it comes to trade within the Eurasian Economic Union format. So the organization can, at least for now, serve as Moscow's instrument that it uses in the post-Soviet space, although it cannot be as efficient as it was in the past.
Okay, so let's stay on Armenia. You said that there is a chance that they're one of the first countries that may possibly leave. Their also increasingly uneasy relationship with Moscow has also raised questions about regional cohesion. Does the Eurasian Economic Union currently face internal political strains?
I think so, although they're trying to hide it, because now Russia, as I said, will hold parliamentary elections in September, so Russia is not in a position to additionally jeopardize its relations with countries such as Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan to some extent. So it's trying to, as I said, create an illusion that everything is under control, that things are going according to plan, although in reality that's not the case. I'm not claiming that Armenia will leave the organization in the near future, but in let's say, long term or mid-term, if forced to choose between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union, I think it will choose the European Union because it is firmly backed by the West and by the European Union and by the United States. And if that happens, then that will raise a question of the very existence of the Eurasian Economic Union, because if one of the key members leaves the organization and no other countries are interested in joining except Iran, then what's the point of the existence of the very organization? But for now, I think Russia will continue to dominate the Eurasian Economic Union because it has economic interests, and the economy, especially energy, is one of the key drivers of its foreign policy. So it will continue using this organization as an instrument in its foreign policy and its economic policy.
Okay, Nicola, that's all we have time for this hour. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. Thanks for your analysis today.
Thank you.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.